Good morning. Please welcome Sister Sharon Paul, now the General Superior for the Congregation of Sisters of St. Agnes, to the podium for our welcome and opening reflection.
Good morning. Thank you, Dusty, and all of you who helped make this breakfast possible. Thank you. Good morning to all you wonderful women. Welcome to CSA's Breakfast with Women for the purpose of energizing spirits. Just coming together this morning as women energizes my spirit. Since moving from Ohio, I have witnessed the passion and the goodness of you, the women of Fond du Lac, who have done amazing things for this community. We, the Sisters of St. Agnes, hope our time together this morning will energize all our spirits to continue the journey forward, perhaps adding new companions along the way. I would like to take a moment to introduce the other members, the new members of CSA's leadership team. So would you stand? Sister Lyell, Sister Madeline, and Sister Pei. Thank you. Our sisters bless us every day. Our partners in mission energize our spirits. The well springs of the sacred flows into and through all of us and all creation. How good it is to be with you this morning. Thank you for coming. Richard Rohr states that everything is sacred for those who have learned to see. I am just beginning to learn that the energy in the universe is not in the planets or the protons or neutrons, but in the relationship between them. The wellspring of the sacred flows into and through all of us. Imagine what the deepening of our relationship as women in Fond du Lac could do for each of us, for our families, our friends, our community, and our world. The kind of energies that flows out of us will be the energy that returns to us. How crucial is the contribution of women to tend the earth, to attend to the presence and the action of the divine. This will demand of all of us a gentleness born of grace and a solidarity born of spaciousness, to truly see the divine in one another and in the beauty of the cosmos. So let us pray. Energizing Spirit, awaken us to new ways of seeing. Enable us to hear a new silence, a silence that beckons a new courage to move into the depth of relationship. May the presence of the divine empower us to go into our heart space, not for ourselves, but for a hurting world, a wounded people, a fragile nation, that we may be part of the healing of relationships. May we learn to recognize, to receive gifts of the Creator with the warm hands of gratitude and create a culture of encounter, one in which we are open to the ever-present Spirit of God, transforming human hearts and relationships and the graced unfolding of all creation. May we learn to hold the hands of one another as women who see the sacred in ourselves, in one another, and in all the created world. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Sharon. Congratulations. Congratulations to everybody in this room on finding time to dedicate solely to yourself for 1 hour or maybe an hour and a half this morning. My name is Dusty Krickow. I serve as the Director of Mission Advancement for the Sisters of St. Agnes. And before I introduce our keynote speaker this morning, I'd like to take a moment to recognize CSA as the organization making today's event possible. Like many of you, Mother Agnes Hazett, the first General Superior of the Sisters of St. Agnes, spent many of her hours dedicated to serving those around her. Around this time, a little more than 150 years ago, she made an exploratory visit to Fond du Lac. And then just 3 months later, she finalized the purchase of land and cemented the decision to move CSA from Barton, Wisconsin to Fond du Lac, where she would lead the congregation to build the city's first hospital, open a school, farm the land, and provide spiritual guidance to the community. I would imagine she, too, would have found a welcome respite in a morning spent energizing her spirit with other women, as we're doing today. And now we come to our keynote speaker. Sisters and associates in the room are well aware of the privilege that it is to hear from Sister Dianne Bergant. She has a bachelor's degree in elementary education from Marian College, now university, right here in Fond du Lac, and master's and doctorate degrees in biblical languages and literature from St. Louis University. A prolific author with more than 25 books and 100 published articles, Sister Dianne is known for her expertise in biblical interpretation and biblical theology, particularly in issues of peace, ecology, and feminism. Her depth of knowledge is only matched by the enthusiasm and insight she brings to sharing it. As Professor Emerita of Old Testament Studies and Carol Stullmiller Distinguished Professor of Biblical Studies at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, she continues to inspire thousands of students to a better understanding of their personal relationship with the transcendent. And today, she's here to offer us that same inspiration. Please help me welcome Sister Dianne.
I have a pinched nerve. I can't stand too long. I'm very happy to be with you this morning. And with the inspiration of introduction, not to me, but the introduction that we got from Sister Sharon, I want to continue a little bit on that theme of energizing. There are today many spiritual theorists or philosophical theorists that talk about holons, Holons. I don't know if you ever heard about a holon, but each one of us is one. A holon is something that has a complete identity in itself, as each one of us does, and yet is part of a larger whole, which each one of us is. The theorists tell us that everything in the universe is a holon, a whole part, or a part whole. And that's what I want to talk about today. Without using that language, Sister talked a little bit about us together. Us together, what does that mean? Well, it means we are women today together. And in that sense, as individuals, we have come. But we are also part of a larger group, which is part of all of the women in Fond du Lac, which is a larger group. It's almost a little bit like that Russian or Ukrainian, if you don't like Russian, nesting dolls, where a small one is in something bigger, which is part of something bigger, which is part of something bigger. And that's what we are. We are complete in ourselves, and yet we're part of something that gives us a deeper kind of completeness. All right, in Fond du Lac, and then larger, that's part of all of the women in Wisconsin, which is the whole, which is part of all of the women in the United States, which is the whole, which is part, you get what that's like, as it gets bigger and bigger until the largest whole that we are part of is the universe. So you can trace it in that direction. You can also trace it the other direction, where each one of us is a unique individual, complete in herself, and yet we're made up of parts. We're made up of organs. which are part of the whole, but they are also a whole. Each one of the organs, for example, the heart is made up of cells, which is made up of molecules, which is made up of atoms, which is made up, and I think the smallest thing they have discovered now is the neutrino, which they've never seen, but they know is there because of its effects. So everything is part of everything. And I think that's very important for us to understand, particularly we Americans, where individualism is such a value, an important value, and it is. But by itself, it's egocentric. And each individual is part of a whole. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. There are 4 characteristics of holons, and I'm not going to use that word anymore. I think you know what it means. It's always important when you go to hear a talk, you come back with at least a little bit of new vocabulary. I'm a teacher. All right. 4 characteristics of each one of us. 4 characteristics of everything alive. But think of yourself. There are 4 characteristics of each one of us. First of all, self-preservation. We do not decide this. We're wired for it. Just as we decided to eat breakfast, but once it was in our mouth and we swallowed it, we have nothing to do with what happens to it. It's a kind of automatic, all right? So we do not decide to engage in or to commit ourselves or be driven by a sense of self-preservation. We are wired for that. We are also, in a certain sense, I don't want to say the opposite, but the mutual companion for self-preservation is connectedness. So it's self-adaptation. It's self-adaptation, not the adaptation of others, self-adaptation. The 4th one is self-dissolution, the 3rd one. And the 4th one is self-transcendence. Those are the things I want to talk about today. And I want the way it can be meaningful to you, other than new vocabulary, is I want each one of you to think of a very important relationship that you have. And we will look at these 4 characteristics in terms of how these characteristics function within you. Not how they function within you. First, self-preservation. Well, the obvious one is we don't normally jump out of windows. But some people do. All right? And in a certain sense, when they do that, they are acting against the natural urge of self-preservation. Or maybe not. Maybe they think that the only way they can continue to retain themselves is to end it. Think about this relationship. Think about how you began to operate within this relationship in terms of self-preservation. You might right now be sitting at the table with people you don't know. And if you are chances are not apt to reveal your secrets to them, because you don't know how they will understand them, how they will respect them. And why don't you do that? Because of self-preservation, your own feelings. We tend to, and this is all good, this is the way human beings are made. We protect ourselves from each other. And unfortunately, we must sometimes. But at other times, we don't know for sure how they're going to take what you say or what we say. And so we don't say everything we know. We don't say everything we feel. We protect ourselves. If we didn't protect ourselves, we would need someone to protect us. We may know people who do not have the ability to protect themselves, and so they must be protected by us. We all need and function out of self-preservation. And as you got to know more and more the person you're thinking about, self-preservation becomes less important. Instead of self-preservation, it's self-adaptation. We adapt to each other. Little by little, we adapt to each other. We may want to change the other one. Then that's not necessarily self-preservation. But if you're laughing, you know what I'm talking about. But just think about how we adapt to someone. Sometimes, there's a little dance that goes on. You go forward a little bit, but you care. I know I'm like that. I'm when I think of somebody, a friend or a family member, but I'm thinking of a friend, I wasn't quite sure how that friend would take me. And so whenever I said anything, there was always a way out. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Or I was thinking of this. Always a way out because I was afraid to be rejected. Who's not afraid to be rejected? Let's see a show of hands. So, and we are not, or we don't want to be rejected because we desperately need other people. We cannot live alone. We're not just wholes. We are parts of something bigger than us. And a friendship is something bigger than us. And if it's not a friendship. It's two people walking together and not hand in hand. So we have self-preservation and self-adaptation. And in a friendship, we adapt. We adapt to the friend. We hope the friend will adapt to us, because if the friend doesn't adapt to us, we protect ourselves because it's not a friend. Now, you can call it what you like, but that's the dance we do all the time, every day of our life. You do not retire from that. In fact, if you retire, you may be more conscious of it than you are if you're working and are distracted, because that's the way we operate as human beings. And they're constantly, not necessarily intention, but they're constantly in the self, balancing or overbalancing. There are some times when we must be more protective than adaptive. And there are other times when we must be more adaptive than protective. And sometimes there is a great tension there. And then we have to make a decision. Which way do I go? Do I protect myself? Do I move away? That's protection. Why do we move away from each other? To protect ourselves. You can say in anger, but why? They didn't meet our expectations. So sometimes we have to do that, and sometimes we have to do the other. But in that tension, when it really is a tension, and you almost can't do either, that's the moment of self-transcendence. So, which means you're a better person for it. Not too long ago, I was in a conversation with someone about someone else, because it's always easier to talk about someone else. And it did not happen in Fond du Lac, lest anyone with whom I live is trying to figure out who she's talking about. And I say that out of self-preservation. Anyway, this other person, a colleague of mine in Chicago, has a tendency of being very blunt and hurtfully blunt. And my friend was saying, give it back for all practical purposes. If she can be blunt, so can you. And my response was, I'm only sharing with you my successes. My response was, to what purpose? What good can come out of it? I mean, it's almost as if somebody punches you in the face, and what's your response? To punch back? What good has that done? That's when the better person that we can be, not the others. Every one of us can be our better self. Every one of us, throughout our entire life, can be transformative of ourselves. What good will come if you shoot somebody down? What good will come if you respond in anger? Anger generates anger, generates anger, generates anger. Anger can give us an opportunity to be our better self, to involve in self-transformation. And that can happen, and it does happen, every single day. Again, think of the person that you're thinking about. And how many times have you been your better self? That's self-transformation. And in all of this movement, whether it be self-preservation, self-adaptation, self-transformation, all of that, the way we talk with religious language or psychological language, but I will talk with religious language. What gives us the strength to transform ourselves? Not the other. We're not responsible for their transformation. They're responsible for their transformation. And sometimes they've got to transcend themselves because of what we've done, rather than respond to us in kind. That happens constantly. And again, it happens in friendships. It happens in the marriages. It happens with children and parents. Little children and bigger children. It happens whenever we interact with another person. Something is always going on. One of those 4 characteristics is always operative. Sometimes dramatically, sometimes so simply we're not even aware of it. So that's self-transformation. And the other one is self-disillusionment, which means that just as transformation makes life richer, the other one diminishes life. And we all experience diminishment of life. Sometimes because of illness, sometimes because of age, sometimes because of the death of a loved one, sometimes of disappointment. Need I list these? You know them as well as I do, because it's what life is all about as well. Just as life is always all about the possibility of being our better self, life is also always a challenge. What do you do with the dying in life? Not just the end, but that as well. Not everybody dies the same way. All right, not everybody deals with fear the same way. Not everybody deals with disappointment the same way. Those are all things that we feel diminish us, but they needn't diminish us, because in those moments we can self-transcend. What do you do with the disappointment? Do you write them off? Do you write your friend off when he or she disappoints you? Who has a friend who has never disappointed you? I haven't yet met anyone that deserves me. Now, you don't know if I use that positively or negatively. And you're laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about. But looking at it, as a diminishment, disappointment. What do you do with disappointment? Do you forgive? That's self-transcendence. Or you carry a grudge? That's really diminishment. You have diminished yourself as a human being by carrying a grudge because you drag all that crap behind you. It's a diminishment. And if we are lucky, we do not diminish ourselves so much that we can't get out of it. Sometimes that happens in relationships. Too much unforgiven disappointment, I'm through. And you're diminished. I'm not talking about sin. I'm talking about human life. Forgiving is a transforming moment. Forgiving is a transforming moment. And we are told in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we must forgive because we're dealing with limited people just like us. We're all limited. We all make mistakes. We all have bad days. We cannot allow these things to simply diminish us. And just because we transcend with graciousness does not mean the feeling is going to go away. If you've been dumped, what do you do with that? If you feel betrayed by the one you have loved, what do you do with that? Sometimes because of self-preservation, you must move away. But what about, I'm sure, not just self-preservation, but what you've got there is a sense of diminishment and anger and betrayal and stuff that can eat at your soul for years, and they have forgotten it 10 years ago. And they're not hurting, but you still are. So it's constant diminishment. Now, this is what it means to be a human being with tremendous potential. Potential does not belong to the young. Potential belongs to the alive. Whoever is alive life is filled with potential. Now, maybe we understand our potential in times of our work. How tragic that is. How tragic. Because what happens then if you're not working at it anymore? And you feel, I got to do something. I've got to do something. Why do you have to do something? Because your value is in your work, not in yourself. And the transcendence, the self-transcendence, may be the opportunity to accept the fact I can't do it anymore. But just because I can't do it doesn't mean I am not valuable, because I can deal with it. I can deal with diminishment because I know ultimately I will never be diminished. That's what our faith tells us. Life can beat us up and leave us bleeding, but it need not destroy us. Not if we believe that we are loved. Not if we believe that there is a God who has made us the way we are. And I'm not talking about heaven. Who knows what that is? I'm a theologian. I can give you the right words. Theology is simply language we use to try to talk about what we don't understand. The incomprehensible. And whether you are a believer or not, you have to admit life is incomprehensible. So to that extent, you believe in something, whether you know what it is or not. A religious tradition is simply an attempt to explain the incomprehensible. I am convinced, some of my sisters have heard me say this before, I am convinced that if there is a moment after death, I don't know if there is, because they tell us there's no space and time, it's different. but I don't have any other language. But if there is a moment after death that I meet God, and God has one thing to say to me, surprise. That's the incomprehensible. And that's each one of us is incomprehensible. But these dynamics are always operative. Always operative. So we have, again, look at what's going on in the world today, in our country, in our politics. How tragic that is that we cannot talk to each other. And not they can't talk to each other. We can't either. We may have friends, relatives. I say often, I have one sibling. I have a sister who is 2.5 years my senior. And I have said often, I will crawl to the polls to vote if I must, so that I can cancel out my sister's vote. So regardless of who's elected, nobody can blame the Bergants. And again, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we have decided, at least I have decided, my relationship with my sister is more important than the veracity of my political stand. It's more important. And we do that in a certain sense. I mean, it's self-preservation. I don't know it's self-preservation. But I remember sitting in my parents' home, and my brother-in-law, it was Thanksgiving. I can see the chairs where they were. And it was shortly after a national election. And I made the comment that I said, I'm not convinced that so-and-so won so much as people voted against the other one. And that happens sometimes. And my brother-in-law said to me, what right do you have to talk like that? When was the last time you paid taxes? I never spoke about politics to him again. And not because I wasn't talking to him, but my relationship with my sister is much more important than I get my word across. Now, there are times when I did not allow myself to transcend a tenseful or an anxious situation. But I share with you, some things are more important than holding our own and insisting on our position. And you know that, I am sure, in a relationship, not because, you've been beaten down. That's failure. I don't think the situation I gave you was failure. I think it was success for me. There are other times I shouted off my mouth. I have a fast mouth. I will give them that. But that time I did not. And I haven't because I know there's no point in it. What good can come from it? If good can come from it, then that's different. Then you must say what you firmly believe and take the consequences. But what's the point in some of the disagreements that we have? And we can transcend them because we value that person or we value the relationship. To me, I think that is a success. What they thought is beside the point. Whether he thought, I won that one, is beside the point. But I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room who has had the experience when you have said what you want to say and you regret it afterwards. And you think, I should have kept my mouth shut. Nothing good came from it. Now, is this religious living? Of course it is. Or maybe it's not. It doesn't have to be. Why do you have to put, a title to it? But this is human living. And I personally believe that all real human living is religious living. Because we are made with these dynamics, these operative things that go on in our lives all the time. The question is, how do we deal with them? Again, think of yourself for a moment. What do you think would really diminish you? Really? That is within your power to change. Is there someone that could diminish you? Is there something that could diminish you? The issue is not what diminishes us. The issue is, what do we do with what could diminish us? Frequently, when someone dies, someone that we love dies, we realize if we are fortunate, and not that if they are fortunate, but if we are fortunate, we realize that they lived life to the end. To me, that is a successful life. Death does not mean life is not successful. If that's the case, we're all in for it. So again, diminishment, which nobody wants. I say it over and over again. The point is, what do you do with it? Think of those things you're afraid of. What do you do with your fears? What do you do with situations that seem to diminish you? However you understand diminishment, it's what we do with them. Think again of these 4 characteristics. I say diminishment, but that's the point where we can transcend. The first one that I talked a little bit about is self-preservation. Sometimes the people who are most aggressive in relationships are people who are frightened to death. Frightened to death. And they are aggressive because it's their way of preserving themselves. We say they're defensive. Why are people defensive? Because they're afraid they're going to be diminished. And so they protect themselves. And maybe all of us, probably all of us, have something in our lives that we think can really destroy us. I don't believe we will be destroyed. I do not understand a God like that. Death, yes. We have no evidence, or we have very little evidence, if you will. Maybe I'm just, I want to say this. It may be an extreme position. There's no evidence that there's anything after this life. The evidence is millions of people before us, ancient people, medieval people, contemporary people believe, and not all of the same faith, that there's more to life, or there's more to existence than this life. And to that, I quote Abraham Lincoln, who once said, "You can fool some of the people some of the time, most of the people most of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time." The very fact that belief that this life is not, or death is not the end of existence, has been so much in the minds and hearts of human beings, not simply because they don't want to die, because who wants to die? I think the only people who really want to die are those who find life so unbearable. Because we have the desire to live and to be fulfilled and enriched. That is a fundamental desire. So the very fact that most of the human race has believed without an awful lot of proof because life is too good and too valuable to have it for only 80, 90, as the Psalm says, 70, or if you're lucky, 80 years. It's one of the Psalms. Many of us have outshone that. So we live life fully. That's all we have. That's what we have. That's all we have. Or to say it, and that's all we have. We have all of it. All of it. We just have to learn how to deal with it as we have it. And as we deal with it, as we have it, we transcend what we are afraid of. We transcend what appears to diminish us. And we say, diminish? I'll learn how to adjust. And we all know how adjustment to life, that again is self-adaptation. We adapt to people. We adapt to circumstances. I mean, look how many people in this room are wearing glasses. That's self-adaptation. I won't ask how many have other teeth. That's self-adaptation. So we learn how to do it, and that has not diminished us. It has enriched us. So we learn how to adapt that, and there is that drive. No one has to, really tell us. They may have to remind us because we're in the dumps. But we learn to adapt. We learn to protect. We learn to adapt, and we hold them in balance. And discernment helps us to decide, what do I have to do now? Do I do something that enables me to transcend what I'm afraid of? Or do I allow it to continue to diminish me? Welcome to the real world. This is life, and it's worth living. We all know that. It's worth living. It is up to us to decide, really. It is up to us to decide if we're going to live it fully. Or are we going to give in because it's too hard? And it can get hard. And we can be heroic. Many of us have been heroic because there was nothing else to do but be heroic or be destroyed. So it's not up to me to welcome you to life, but I do. Thank you. Anybody have any comments, observations, or questions from the floor? Yes.
I was wondering, you're so widely published, do you have one of your books that is kind of a synopsis of what we talked about this morning?
No. Actually, the basis of what I talked about today comes from a theorist. His name is Ken Wilber. And he talks about holons, But I just found, and I read him years ago, and I just found, for what they wanted me to do today, that those four different characteristics, were really...
What was his name again, please?
Wilber, Wilbur, Ken. Most of what I've written is really commentary. What does the Bible... I've got some books that are more spiritual, but most of what I've written is commentary. So thank you very much. Anyone else?
Could you write a book?
I could, yeah. Then you got to find a publisher. Thank you. Anyone else? Comments, observations? If you like what I said, it's because it made sense to your own experience. Not so much that I said it, but it made a connection with you. And I think I just thought that do it that way, then just give you information. Have you really create a context within which it makes sense, and the context is your own life. So, and also I think, I mean, this is stuff that, these kind of ideas, which I simply developed, I didn't create. I developed them, can serve us for the rest of our lives. Because these dynamics are operative, always. There are others that are operative as well. But I just think in terms of how we deal with the events and the realities of life, I really like, just 4 little ideas, which really gives insight. And you discover you've been doing some of this without realizing it, and or you may discover you're a fraud. I have discovered often that I'm a fraud, but then that discovery is really good to recognize it as self-transformation, or at least transcendence. Anyone else, comments, observations? No? Oh, yes.
One. I've been to these before, and this is by far the most inspiring.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to add, it's because you were thinking of yourself. That's really, and that's not egocentric. I don't mean it in an egocentric way, as you know. Because I am happy that you found it as self-revelatory as I found it when I studied him years ago. I want to make a comment about what I said about life after this life, or existence after this life. I don't want anybody to leave this room thinking, that I don't believe in heaven. What I'm saying is we have no idea what it's all about. Because I said over and over again, this can't be all there is. This can't be all there is. At least, as I said, quote Abraham Lincoln. Anyone else?
Yes, I do. I work at Marian University, and we've been seeing a lot of students struggle with mental health, especially after COVID. It seems like it's tripled as far as withdrawing from school and stuff, and I would love to invite you to speak to our students in Marian.
Oh, I got an invitation to Marian. I used to teach there, 5 years when I was in the council, I taught there. I would be happy to. However, I do not make the invitation. Somebody else does. Thank you very much.
Consider it coming.
Okay? Then thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.
That was very, very good. I feel like that is a vibe that is flowing through the room. I think I've seen people with tears in their eyes and choking up as I was looking around during the conversation. So thank you so much for Sister Dianne for moving us all this morning. And so one more thank you to her. If you enjoyed this morning's gathering and the conversations that were at your table, and you would like to gather like this on a more regular basis, you may find our Sisters and Seekers group to be the perfect place to do so. It's modeled after the National Nuns and Nuns program. Sisters and Seekers gatherings are more than events. They are places for relationship, dialogue, spiritual practice, and social action. They're joyful, spirit-led, and held by the capable hands of committed organizers. They're rooted in mutual learning, not the persuasion of belief. They aim to bring forth a more just and loving world, no longer dependent on systems of extraction and oppression. They are pluralistic, welcoming of all identities, and LGBTQ affirming, and they, at their best, grow into committed community. If you would like to be added to the list of people to participate in future Sisters and Seekers gatherings in the coming weeks and months, you can express your interest as part of the follow-up survey that you'll be receiving in 5 minutes in your email. We do have one last formal portion. I'm going to invite Sister Jean Hinderer to the podium to offer our closing reflection.
I almost reached that. It's always nice to leave with a blessing after a wonderful day, morning like this. There is a NBC nightly news anchor by the name of Jose Diaz-Balart, and he always concludes his broadcast with these words, "And thank you for the privilege of your time." That is our expression for us today also, but we would like to include this as an extension. And thank you for the privilege of your presence. Thank you for the privilege of your presence. And so I would like to have us leave with a blessing, and it's from an author and poet. Sorry, Sister Dianne, I have to use someone else. Is Jan Richardson. She's written a book called Circle of Grace, and it's a beautiful book, so I offer that. And this is what she writes as a blessing. It's entitled, Blessing That Makes a Way for You. What I know is that this blessing will begin as soon as you set out. That this blessing will meet you in every step. That it is gladly bound to you and cannot do without you. That you are part of the path this blessing makes. That it creates a way not only for you, but through you and in you. That it finds its road as you find yours. I can hardly fathom how it is that this blessing is already waiting for you, even as you fashion it, step by faltering step. But there it is in all its wending mystery. So may you meet it with courage. May you enter it with clarity. May you walk it with wisdom, and may you travel it with joy. Thank you for the privilege of your presence. Amen. Amen.